You are kneeling in mud that is not entirely mud, and the man in front of you has roughly 90 seconds of consciousness left before shock takes the decision out of both your hands, and everything you were taught in a classroom 6 months ago has just become theoretical in a way that classrooms cannot prepare you for. You are a combat medic. It does not matter which war. That is the first thing nobody tells you about this job. The war changes, the uniform changes, the language screamed around you changes, but the 90 seconds never change, and the tricks you reach for in those 90 seconds are some of the strangest, most improvised, most quietly brilliant solutions human beings have ever invented under pressure. Start here. Normandy, June 1944. You are crouched behind a hedgerow with a casualty whose leg is no longer cooperating with the rest of him, and you reach for the one tool every medic in this war carries clipped to their webbing, a single-use syringe of morphine, shaped almost exactly like a small toothpaste tube with a needle on the end. The men call it the morphine cigarette, because of how it is administered and because dark humor is the only currency that holds its value out here. You squeeze the tube. The needle delivers a fixed, standardized dose, the same amount for a 130-pound radio operator as for a 210-pound machine gunner, because the tube does not know the difference and neither, in the chaos of a hedgerow firefight, do you always have time to calculate one? Here is the fact nobody tells you about the morphine cigarette. Too much, and the casualty's heart rate and breathing can fail entirely. The same drug meant to save the man can become the thing that kills him, administered by the same trembling hands trying to help. Medics were trained to give less when they could. In practice, under fire, in the dark, with blood on your gloves and your own hands shaking from adrenaline, give less is a much harder instruction to follow than it sounds in a training manual. Decades later, in a different war, on a different continent, a different medic in your boots solves this exact problem with something that looks, on first glance, like it belongs in a child's pocket rather than a medical kit. A fentanyl lollipop. Same opioid family. Far more potent. Pressed into the casualty's cheek against the inside of the mouth, where the mucous membrane absorbs it directly into the bloodstream, pain relief in minutes instead of the longer onset of an injection, and an elegant, almost accidental safety mechanism built into the delivery method itself. Once the casualty is sedated enough, the lollipop simply falls out of their mouth. The medication stops. The dosing problem that haunted every medic holding a morphine syringe in 1944 is solved by something a child could mistake for candy, taped to the casualty's fingers so it can be retrieved and reinserted exactly as needed. It comes in flavors. Sweetened lemon. Raspberry. The most carefully engineered overdose prevention system in modern combat medicine, and it tastes like something you'd buy at a county fair. Go back further into the same Normandy hedgerow, because the leg wound is not finished with you yet. The bleeding will not stop with pressure alone, and the tourniquet you applied above the wound is buying time, not solving the underlying problem, and somewhere behind your eyes you are doing the math every medic in every war eventually does. How much time does this man actually have, and is what I'm doing in front of me actually enough? Now jump to Vietnam, a different jungle, a different decade, and a young army medic working with absolutely nothing left in the kit but improvisation, reaching for a tube of construction-grade superglue because the bleeding has to stop now, and the only thing in arm's reach that can close a wound fast enough is an adhesive invented by accident a few years earlier by a scientist trying to build a clear plastic gun sight and failing spectacularly upward into one of the most useful substances in modern history. The medic squeezes the glue directly into the wound edges and presses them together. It is not FDA approved for this. It was never designed for this. It carries real risk of trapping contamination beneath the surface, sealing infection in along with everything else, and it will absolutely cause skin irritation that nobody on that medevac flight has the bandwidth to care about. But it buys the one thing every combat medic is actually fighting for in those 90 seconds, time. Time to get the casualty out of the jungle and onto a helicopter and into the hands of someone with a real operating table. The substance works so well, used by so many medics improvising in so many different jungles and deserts over so many years, that by 1998 a medical-grade version of the exact same chemistry gets official approval and becomes the liquid bandage sitting in pharmacy aisles today, a direct descendant of a battlefield improvisation that started with desperate hands and a tube meant for arts and crafts. Pull back further. There is a powder in this story too, and it belongs to an earlier medic in an earlier war, kneeling over a wound and doing something that looks almost ceremonial, tearing open a small paper packet and sprinkling crystallized sulfanilamide powder directly across the open wound before the bandage goes on, like seasoning something that should never need seasoning. Infection has killed more soldiers across human history than the wounds themselves ever did, and this powder, paired with tablets the casualty swallows at the same moment, is the era's best available answer to that older, slower killer that waits in the days after the bullet, after the bleeding, after the evacuation, in the wound itself. It is not perfect. It cannot reach infection seated deep in tissue, only what sits on the surface. Soldiers with abdominal wounds are specifically told not to take the tablets, because the nausea and cramping the medication itself produces would only worsen an already catastrophic injury. By the time this same war ends, something better has already started replacing it, penicillin, an antibiotic so much more effective that the sulfa powder becomes a relic within a few short years, a stopgap solution that did its job exactly long enough to be quietly retired by something better. Move forward again, because the bleeding problem that has haunted every medic in every era of this story has one more answer, and it comes from somewhere almost nobody would guess, the shells of shrimp and crabs. A compound called chitosan, derived from crustacean shells, processed into gauze and gel and powder that does something almost unbelievable when packed directly into a wound. It accelerates clotting dramatically faster than pressure or a tourniquet alone, turning a wound that might bleed out in minutes into one that seals itself in a fraction of that time. Modern combat medics carry this gauze as standard kit now, the same biological chemistry that exists in a creature pulled from the ocean repurposed into one of the most effective hemorrhage control tools ever developed for human battlefield trauma. Bleeding first. Infection later. That is the modern triage philosophy, learned the hard way across decades of medics discovering, kneeling in mud and sand and jungle rot, exactly which problem kills you faster. And now the final piece of this story, the one that is less about chemistry and more about something darker, the cross itself. The simple red cross on a white background, painted on a helmet, stitched onto an armband, meant to declare to anyone watching through a rifle scope that the person wearing it is there to save lives, not take them, and is therefore protected, at least in theory, at least under the Geneva Convention, at least by enemies who recognize and honor that theory. In the European theater, German prisoners later admitted the cross sometimes worked exactly as intended. Medics doubled up, wearing the symbol on both arms and painting their helmets even without official orders requiring it, trusting the insignia to do the one job it was designed for. In the Pacific theater, the same symbol became something closer to a target painted directly onto a man's body. Japanese forces specifically hunted medics, understanding with cold tactical precision that killing the person keeping wounded soldiers alive did more damage to American morale than killing another rifleman ever could. So the medics stopped wearing the cross. They picked up weapons. They became combatants in every practical sense while technically remaining something else on paper, because the alternative, trusting a symbol that had become a target, was no longer survivable. Decades later, in Vietnam, the same calculation repeats itself. Medevac helicopters painted with red crosses become exactly what the enemy aims at first. The crosses get painted over. Gunships start escorting the medevac flights. Door guns get mounted on aircraft that were never supposed to need them. And decades after that, in Afghanistan, soldiers make the same quiet decision their grandfathers made in the Pacific: the cross does not protect you here. It marks you. And so it disappears again, era after era, war after war, the same symbol meant to signal mercy instead becoming, again and again, depending entirely on who is on the other side of the field, either a shield or a target. This is the actual history of combat medicine. Not the clean version. Not the sanitized poster on a recruiting office wall. The real version is a fentanyl lollipop taped to a dying man's finger so the dose can be controlled to the minute. It is superglue meant for arts and crafts holding a chest wound closed long enough to reach a helicopter. It is shrimp shells clotting blood faster than pressure ever could. It is a powder that worked just well enough to be replaced. It is a symbol of mercy that, in the wrong war, against the wrong enemy, becomes the reason you die first. You have 90 seconds. You always have 90 seconds. And across 8 decades of modern warfare, the tricks medics have reached for in those 90 seconds say more about human ingenuity under absolute pressure than almost anything else war has ever produced. And this was only the beginning of what they figured out.